Welcome back to Film Snob HQ. We are on the road to Avengers Doomsday, and next up is a tough flick. It's tough, man. This is a movie I bought on Blu-ray simply for this project. I probably wouldn't have bought it otherwise. It is the face that launched 1,000 memes. I am, of course, talking about the Sony spin-off universe that doesn't contain Spider-Man at all movie Morbius. Before we talk about the flick, let's talk about the character himself. Morbius, the living vampire, is a Spider-Man villain. He was created during a time where the Comics Code was in effect. For those who don't know, the Comics Code basically prevented creators from publishing anything too adult. No blood, no violence, no sex, and no undead beings. So no zombies, no vampires. That's why he's the living vampire. He wasn't created the way most vampires were. He's still alive, and that's how they kind of got around that one there. There's an argument to be made for the whole Sony Spider-Man spin-off universe and its existence. I think there's some good in there, for sure. I like the Venom films, as I've talked about in the previous videos. I enjoyed Craven, which we'll talk about when I get to that one. And I even enjoyed elements of Madam Web. I know we'll get there as well, and I'm sure people are tuning out now that I've said that. The thing about this flick is it's not a particularly good movie, but it's not really a bad movie either. It just is 20 years too late. If this film had come out in the mid-2000s, I think there'd be a lot more love for this film. I think there'd be a lot more intrigue in it. But we're in the MCU now. We're in a post-DCEU era. Like, The Dark Knight has come out, and Man of Steel, and Iron Man, and Avengers Infinity War. You gotta kick it up a notch. And we've had the best superhero comic book vampire film ever made with Blade. So if you're going to do a comic book vampire film, it needs to be at least as good as one of the Blade films. And unfortunately, it's not quite that. However, despite that, I do have some positives about the flick. Let's talk about it. Michael Morbius is a doctor who was born with an immune disease, played by Jared Leto. At the beginning of the film, we see him going into, I think it's the Amazon. Honestly, I can't remember. I just watched this flick and I can't remember. And he finds out these vampire bats may hold the cure to his blood disease. We're also introduced to a childhood friend of his, Milo, who'd grow up to be played by Matt Smith of Doctor Who fame, who's got a similar disease to him as well. They're expected to have a short life expectancy, and they're in the care of a doctor played by Jared Harris, who has gone on record as saying he took this job to pay his mortgage. I love it when actors are honest. So we flash forward. He's a brilliant doctor, Michael Morbius. He somehow stayed alive despite not finding the cure yet. And he believes he's been put on this earth and kept alive to find a cure for this blood disease, which will hopefully help millions. He eventually does extract a cure using these vampire bats, but there's something wrong with the serum, and it gives him the powers of a vampire. How? I don't know. Because as we know, vampire bats do not actually turn into vampires. His power set is unusual. He has super strength. He must feed on blood to keep the disease at bay. He can fly, and when he flies, he has smoke around him for some reason. And then his childhood friend Milo comes back into the picture and gets jealous that Morbius has cured himself, but he's like, it's not a cure, it's a curse. But Milo's like, I don't care, I want it anyway. And Milo takes it and becomes a villain. His motivations are kind of weak, and his story isn't great. However, I will say one thing I really dug about this flick is that Milo is a ruthless villain. He kills everyone. He kills Morbius's adoptive father, played by Jared Harris. He plays Morbius's quote-unquote love interest, played by Adria Iona. Like, he leaves no one left alive that Morbius cares about, and I dig that in a villain. I like that he is cruel. I like that he is relentless. And he has something over most Marvel films, which is he is willing to go the distance. You know, most villains in the Marvel flicks tend to have a line or get stopped before they can cross that line. So whilst this film is not my favorite Marvel film, in fact, it's probably around the same level as like a Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance for me, I do appreciate that in their villain. The villain is ruthless and will go to any means. I think this film would have benefited from being an R rating. We wouldn't get to R-rated Sony Spider-Man spin-offs until Craven, And that kind of highlighted something that this universe needed. Not because these films need to be violent, but they need to be different, and they need to be different in a good way. These kind of all feel a bit watered down. Spider-Man villains without Spider-Man need to prove themselves. And whilst I think Venom did that quite well, even though both of his films are him fighting different versions of himself, Morbius falls back into kind of the old tropes we saw in a pre-MCU era. It just doesn't quite leave a mark. I found myself looking away from the screen at time, not because it's a bad movie, I just didn't care. And I wish I did. I didn't really care until the end, when they started, the bad guys started being really bad. I'm also not a huge fan of the look of the vampires. I know it's actually pretty comic book accurate, but it's just so CGI heavy. I wish they had have gone with makeup. I think that would have led something to it as well. So look, it's not a terrible movie. It's not awful. There are things to enjoy about it. The performances are all decent. The story is fine. It just feels a little underwhelming in the era we're in. But if you're a completionist, I recommend checking it out. We also haven't had like a real horror story yet in the Marvel universe, so there's that going for it as well. It has the most confusing post-credit sequence, so much so that when I was reading the trivia on the flick, they said that Adrian Toomes, played by Michael Keaton, actually was meant to be in the film, and then they realized, the people making the film realized during development that didn't make sense because he's not from this universe. Real story. So he's in the post-credit sequence. This follows the events of No Way Home, and Adrian Toomes is transported to this Earth. So okay, I'll go with that. That makes sense. Except that the spell should have removed him because the spell was undone in No Way Home as well. And then the film ends with Morbius and Adrian Toomes meeting up, saying they're going to work together. Adrian Toomes has his vulture suit, but he's not in the MCU planet anymore. He's a kind of more of he's a villain, but he's villain motivated by the deeds of Tony Stark, who's no longer alive. And Morbius is meant to be a hero, or at least an anti-hero. So I don't know what they're planning on doing. I don't know. I was thoroughly confused by that. And yeah, Toomes should be gone by now because the spell was undone. I don't know, man. That's Morbius. I'd give it a go. I don't think he's showing up. I would like a version of Morbius in the MCU. He's a cool character. It's a cool concept, the idea of a vampire. Chuck him in a Blade movie, if we ever get that. But this version's just a little bit subpar. But it's fine. Next up is Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness.